Last fall, my trail camera started picking up something that changed everything I believed about those forests. What started as mild curiosity turned into full obsession, and that obsession led me down a path I never could have imagined. It led me to discover something I still have trouble believing actually happened. I've been hunting the same woods for 15 years. I know every deer trail, every clearing, every spot where the big bucks bed down in winter. I know where the does feed in the early morning and where the turkeys roost at night. I know which ridges catch the wind and which hollows stay still on the coldest days. I thought I knew everything about those woods, every secret they held, every pattern of life that moved through them. Turns out I was wrong. It started simple enough, the way these things always do. Nothing dramatic at first, nothing that screamed danger or mystery. Just a regular September morning, the kind of crisp fall day that makes you grateful to be alive and out in the woods instead of stuck behind a desk somewhere. I set up my cameras like I do every season, positioning them carefully near game trails to track deer movement patterns. It's something I've been doing for close to a decade now, part of my pre-season ritual that I take as seriously as some guys take their fantasy football drafts. I study the patterns, figure out where the deer are traveling at different times of day, and plan my entire hunting strategy based on what those cameras show me. Over the years, this system has helped me tag some really nice bucks. I had 8 cameras spread across my usual hunting grounds that year, each one covering a different area that I knew from experience produced good sightings. The first week of September, I made my initial run to check the memory cards and swap out batteries. It's always exciting, that moment when you pop the card into your laptop and scroll through what's been moving through your woods while you weren't there watching. It's like Christmas morning for hunters, seeing what bucks have survived the summer, which does have fawns, what newcomers have moved into the area. Most of the footage was exactly what you'd expect to see. Does with their fawns still in their reddish summer coats, a few young bucks, their antlers just starting to harden for the fall rut. Raccoons waddling through at night, their eyes glowing green in the infrared flash. The occasional coyote slinking past, always looking over its shoulder like it knows it doesn't quite belong. Standard stuff, the usual cast of characters I see every year. But one camera, the one I'd positioned near a small creek that runs through a thick section of hardwoods, had caught something different. At the very edge of the frame, barely visible in the early morning light, there was a dark shape moving through the trees. It was maybe 100 yards from the camera, far enough that the details were blurry, but close enough that I could make out the basic form. Whatever it was stood way too tall to be a deer. I rewound the footage and watched it again, leaning closer to my laptop screen. The shape was moving upright, walking on 2 legs through the underbrush with a gait that looked almost human, but not quite. The proportions were off somehow, the stride too long, the shoulders too broad. I figured it was probably a bear standing up on its hind legs. We don't get many black bears in that part of the state. Our population is pretty sparse compared to some areas. But they do pass through sometimes, especially in the fall when they're fattening up for winter. I've seen it before, a bear standing upright to get a better view or to reach something in a tree. It's not that unusual. I made a mental note of it, thinking it was interesting but not particularly remarkable, and moved on to checking the other cameras. The next day, I was going through footage from a different camera, this one positioned about a quarter mile from the first. And I saw it again, or at least I saw something similar. This time the figure was even farther in the background, walking upright through a stand of pines on a ridge above where the camera was mounted. The figure was dark against the lighter background of the morning sky, massive in size, and definitely moving like it walked on 2 legs all the time. That detail stuck with me. It wasn't like a bear that stands up for a moment to check something out and then drops back down to all 4s. This thing walked upright the entire time it was in frame, maybe 30 seconds of footage, Moving through the trees like walking on two legs was the most natural thing in the world for it. I started getting curious. This was weird enough to warrant more attention. I spent the next day repositioning 3 of my cameras to cover the general area where I'd seen the figure both times. I placed them strategically, trying to create overlapping fields of view that would catch anything moving through that section of woods. Then I waited. I checked those cameras every other day for the next week, driving out to the woods after work, hiking in to swap memory cards, going home to review the footage. Nothing unusual showed up. The cameras picked up plenty of deer, a whole flock of turkeys moving through one morning, even got a great shot of a bobcat that I'd never seen in those woods before. But whatever that tall, upright figure was, it had vanished completely. Then I started noticing something strange, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The cameras weren't capturing the figure anymore, but they were missing it by just barely. I'd review footage from the morning hours, and way in the background, just at the very edge of what the camera could see, there'd be movement. Dark shapes shifting between trees, too far and too brief to make out clearly. Or I'd arrive at a camera location and find fresh tracks nearby, big tracks in the mud or soft earth, but somehow the camera itself hadn't triggered despite the fact that whatever made those tracks had to have walked right past it. It started feeling intentional, like whatever this thing was had figured out where my cameras were positioned and was deliberately staying just outside their effective range. I know that sounds paranoid, maybe even crazy, but that's exactly what it felt like. One morning in late September, I went out before dawn to move a camera that hadn't been getting much action. I wanted to reposition it to cover a different angle on a trail I knew the deer were using. When I got to the tree where I'd mounted the camera, I found something in the mud near the base that made my blood run cold. It was a footprint, a massive footprint, easily twice the size of my boot, pressed deep into the soft earth. I knelt down next to it, my heart pounding, and studied every detail. This wasn't a bear print. I've seen plenty of bear tracks over the years, and this was nothing like that. Bears have visible claw marks extending well beyond the toe pads, and the overall shape is different, more rounded. This print was elongated, almost human-shaped, with 5 distinct toe impressions that were clearly defined in the mud. The heel was deep, showing that whatever made it had significant weight. The stride length, based on the other partial prints I could see nearby, suggested something tall, something that walked upright with long, confident steps. I pulled out my phone and took several pictures of the print, placing my boot next to it for scale. I wear a size 11. This print was at least 18 inches long, maybe longer. The width was proportional, maybe 7 or 8 inches across at the widest point. Whatever made this track had to weigh several 100 pounds at minimum. That's when I decided to get serious about this whole thing. This wasn't just a bear passing through anymore. This was something else, something I couldn't readily explain. And I needed to know what it was. I spent the next week playing a frustrating game of cat and mouse with whatever was out there in my woods. I'd move cameras based on where I found tracks or saw distant movement, trying to predict where the creature would go next. Every time I thought I had it figured out, the thing would avoid my cameras completely or appear just barely at the edge of frame. I'd reposition cameras based on new sightings, and it would change its route entirely. I was burning through batteries like crazy, filling up memory cards with footage of everything except what I was actually trying to capture. The whole thing was maddening. What really got under my skin was how intelligent it all seemed. This wasn't random. I started noticing clear patterns in the behavior. The creature, whatever it was, only appeared on cameras that faced certain directions, never the ones pointing east toward the access road and civilization. Always the ones facing deeper into the forest, toward the wild country where hardly anyone ever goes. It was like it understood the concept of cameras and was actively working to avoid them while still going about its business in the woods. I was wasting money on batteries and memory cards, losing sleep over this mystery, spending every spare moment either in the woods or reviewing footage. My wife started making comments about my obsession, asking why I was spending so much time on this and what exactly I thought I was going to find out there. I couldn't explain it to her. I barely understood it myself. But I couldn't let it go. Something was in my woods, something big and smart, and I had to know what it was. Then I got an idea, something I'd never tried before. I started marking the trees near my camera locations with small scratches in the bark using my knife. Just little marks down low near the base of the trunk that you wouldn't notice unless you were specifically looking for them. The marks were subtle, nothing that would hurt the trees or be obvious to a casual observer. I wanted to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see if whatever was out there was actually checking the trees for cameras before deciding whether to pass by or take a different route. 2 days later, I came back to check on the marks. Every single one had been disturbed. The bark around each scratch had been peeled away, pulled back to expose the pale wood underneath. It looked like something had run its fingers or claws over the marks, found them, examined them, and then deliberately pulled the bark away to get a better look. Some of the bark pieces were lying on the ground nearby, torn away in strips. I stood there in the woods, staring at those peeled marks, feeling a chill run down my spine despite the warm September afternoon. Whatever this creature was, it wasn't just avoiding cameras by accident or instinct. It was actively checking trees for signs of surveillance. It understood that humans used these trees for mounting equipment, and it was searching for evidence of that equipment before exposing itself. That level of intelligence, that ability to adapt and counter human tactics, scared me more than the size or strength the track suggested. This was something that could think, could reason, could learn our patterns, and develop countermeasures. But it also gave me an idea for how to finally get clear footage. If the creature was checking trees for cameras, then I needed to use that behavior against it. I needed to give it exactly what it expected to find while hiding my real cameras somewhere else entirely. I went home and dug out 2 smaller trail cameras I'd bought years ago but rarely used. Cheaper models that didn't have all the features of my main cameras but would work fine for what I had in mind. Then I headed back to the woods with a new plan. I set up my regular, obvious cameras in plain sight, mounted them on trees at my normal height, right where any creature checking the area would expect to find them. But then, about 20 yards away from each obvious camera, I took those smaller cameras and concealed them in the underbrush. I buried them in piles of leaves with just the lens peeking out. I covered them with dead branches arranged to look natural. I used every trick I knew to make them basically invisible unless you were specifically looking for hidden cameras. Down on your hands and knees, searching every square foot of ground. The theory was simple. The creature would find the obvious cameras, think it had located my surveillance, and then feel safe to pass through the area. But the hidden cameras, positioned to catch anything that walked past the obvious ones, would get the real footage. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not my wife, not my hunting buddies, nobody. I felt foolish enough already, spending all this time and money and mental energy chasing what most people would call a myth. If I'd told my hunting buddies I was trying to photograph Bigfoot, they would have laughed me right out of the local diner where we meet for coffee. Hell, I was half laughing at myself. But I had to know. 3 days passed. 72 hours of anticipation and doubt, wondering if my plan would work or if I was just wasting more time and batteries on this fool's errand. Finally, on the 3rd day, I couldn't wait any longer. I took an early lunch from work and drove out to the woods to check the cameras. I checked the obvious cameras first, the ones mounted in plain sight. The footage was unremarkable. Deer passing through, some raccoons, a couple of squirrels, the usual inhabitants of the forest going about their daily business. Nothing unusual whatsoever. Then I hiked over to the first hidden camera, the one I'd buried in leaves near the creek. My hands were actually shaking a little as I dug it out of its hiding spot and popped out the memory card. I slid it into my phone's card reader and pulled up the footage. And there it was. Right there in the frame, clear as day, was a Bigfoot. Not blurry, not at the edge of frame, not mostly hidden by trees. It was front and center, walking past the camera at a distance of maybe 30 yards. I could see every detail. The creature was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in dark brown fur that looked thick and shaggy, catching the morning light as it moved. The build was humanoid but exaggerated, with shoulders far broader than any human, arms that hung down past where its knees would be, massive hands that looked like they could crush a bowling ball. Its head seemed small relative to the body, set on a thick neck with barely any visible definition between the two. And it was carrying something. A tree trunk, a massive log that had been stripped of all its branches, was resting on the creature's shoulder like it weighed absolutely nothing. The log had to be 15 feet long and probably weighed several hundred pounds at minimum, but the Bigfoot carried it with casual ease, walking smoothly through the undergrowth without any apparent strain or difficulty. I stared at my phone screen in shock, watching the footage loop over and over. The timestamp showed the Bigfoot had walked past at dawn, right around 6 in the morning 2 days ago. It moved with purpose, heading deeper into the forest with long, steady strides. With hands that were definitely shaking now, I went through the rest of the hidden camera footage. The second camera had captured even more. The same Bigfoot, or possibly a different one, it was hard to tell for certain, passing by around 9 in the morning. This time it was empty-handed, heading back in the opposite direction from where the first footage showed it going. The creature was returning, like it had made a delivery somewhere and was heading back to get another load. I checked the timestamp on my other hidden camera, the one near the ridgeline. At 11 in the morning, same day, there it was again. Another log, another trip deeper into the woods, moving along what had to be some kind of regular route. This wasn't a random encounter. This was systematic behavior, purposeful activity, work being done with clear intent. I drove home in a daze and spread my topographical map out on the kitchen table. Using a pencil, I marked every location where I'd gotten footage of the creature. Then I drew lines showing the direction it was traveling each time it appeared on camera. All the lines pointed the same general direction, toward a section of forest I rarely visited because the terrain there was too rough for good deer hunting. Too many hills, too much thick undergrowth, too many fallen trees and rocky outcrops that made walking difficult, and shots almost impossible. Whatever this creature was building, whatever all those logs were for, it was being constructed deep in the forest where almost nobody ever went. The nearest trail was miles away, and even that saw very little foot traffic outside of peak fall color season. I spent the next 2 days completely obsessed with those images and what they meant. I must have watched the footage 100 times, maybe more. I studied the way the Bigfoot moved, analyzing every detail of its gait and posture. The casual strength it displayed carrying those logs, like they were cardboard tubes instead of hundreds of pounds of solid wood. The intelligence and how it avoided my obvious cameras while walking right past my hidden ones, never even glancing in their direction because it had no idea they were there. The purposeful route it was following, moving through the forest with clear destination and intent. This wasn't some dumb animal wandering around the woods randomly. This was something smart, something that could plan and execute complex tasks, something that understood it was sharing the forest with humans and had developed sophisticated strategies for avoiding detection. I thought about telling someone, bringing another person into this mystery, My brother maybe. We'd always been close and he wouldn't judge me too harshly. Or one of my hunting buddies, guys who'd spent as much time in the woods as I had and might have seen strange things themselves. But what would I even say? Hey, I've got trail camera footage of Bigfoot hauling lumber through the woods. Want to come check it out? They'd think I'd lost my mind, they'd think I'd faked the footage somehow, or that I was the victim of an elaborate prank. Hell, part of me wondered if I was losing my mind. Maybe the stress of work had finally gotten to me. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't really there, believing in something my rational mind knew couldn't exist. But the footage was real. The tracks were real. Whatever was happening in my woods, it wasn't a delusion or a hoax. Finally, after 2 days of internal debate, I made my decision. I had to know what it was building. I had to see it with my own eyes. The footage wasn't enough anymore. I needed to understand what was happening in those deep woods, what purpose all that lumber was serving. I packed my gear carefully on a Thursday morning in early October. The leaves were starting to turn, yellows and oranges creeping into the green canopy. And the mornings had that sharp chill that promises winter isn't far behind. I brought my hunting rifle, a .30-06 that I'd used for years, my hunting knife, sharp enough to shave with, 3 water bottles because I had no idea how long I'd be gone, a handful of energy bars and some jerky, my GPS unit with fresh batteries, a small first aid kit, matches in a waterproof container, everything I'd need for a day trip deep into unfamiliar territory. I told my wife I was scouting some new hunting spots for the upcoming season, looking for areas where I might set up for the November rut. She reminded me to be careful, to watch for other hunters who might be out scouting too, and to be home before dark because we had dinner plans with her parents. I promised her I would, feeling guilty about the lie, but knowing she'd never understand or approve if I told her the truth. I started hiking just after dawn, using my GPS to follow the trajectory I'd plotted on my map. The first hour was easy, familiar territory, following established game trails through woods I'd walked 100 times before. The morning was beautiful, crisp and clear, with enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes down and enough sun to warm my shoulders through my jacket. Then the terrain started changing. The game trails became less distinct, harder to follow, eventually petering out entirely. The undergrowth got thicker, tangles of multiflora rose and greenbrier that grabbed at my pants and jacket. The trees grew closer together, their canopy blocking more of the sunlight and casting the forest floor into deep shadow. Fallen logs blocked my path every 100 yards, some of them rotted and crumbling, others still solid enough that I had to climb over them. After 2 hours of hard hiking, pushing through brush and climbing over deadfalls, I started finding the signs I was looking for. Fresh tracks in the muddy areas near a small spring, massive prints that dwarfed my own. The tracks were so deep in the mud that I could see individual toe prints, each one the size of my thumb. I knelt and measured one print with my hand, spreading my fingers as wide as they go. The print was longer than my hand by several inches. I found broken branches high up on trees, way higher than I could reach even if I jumped and stretched as far as possible. Some of them were as thick as my wrist, just snapped clean off like someone had grabbed them and bent them until they broke. The breaks were fresh, sap still oozing from the splintered wood, showing this had happened recently, maybe within the last few days. Then I found the drag marks, and that's when I knew I was getting close. Multiple grooves in the earth, running parallel to each other, where heavy logs had been pulled through the forest. The grooves were 6 inches deep in places, cut through the layers of dead leaves and soft earth all the way down to the clay beneath. Whatever had made these marks had been dragging serious weight, loads that would require a truck or heavy equipment in the normal world. I follow the drag marks like a trail, my heart pounding hard now, adrenaline starting to kick in. Every sound in the forest made me jump. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves had me spinning around with my hand automatically moving toward my rifle. I was in their territory now, and some primal part of my brain knew it and was screaming warnings. The drag marks led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, a natural break in the forest where the trees gave way to open ground. The clearing was maybe 50 yards across, and the ground was absolutely torn up. The earth was covered in massive footprints going in every direction, overlapping each other, pressed deep into the soft ground. There had to be hundreds of prints, maybe thousands, showing that this place had seen heavy traffic over an extended period of time. Near the edge of the clearing, I found scat, multiple piles of it scattered around like a latrine area. The piles were enormous, larger than what any bear would leave. I picked up a stick and poked at one of the fresher piles, studying its contents. It was full of undigested plant matter, berry seeds, what looked like the remains of roots or tubers, even some insect parts. The consistency and contents were wrong for bear, nothing like the scat from deer or any other animal I was familiar with. This was something else entirely. That's when I heard it. A low sound in the distance, rhythmic and purposeful. It sounded like humming or grunting, a deep bass note that I could feel in my chest as much as hear with my ears. The sound repeated every few seconds, steady and regular, not random like an animal call would be. It sounded like effort, like the noise something makes when it's working hard, when it's lifting or pulling heavy weight. I froze in place, barely breathing, every sense on high alert. The sound came again, and this time I realized there were multiple sources, at least 3 or 4 different voices, if you could call them that, all making similar sounds from the same general direction. They were grunting in rhythm with each other, coordinating their efforts on some task. There was more than one of them out there, multiple creatures working together. I moved forward as carefully as I could, staying low to the ground, keeping trees between me and the sounds, trying to make myself as small and quiet as possible. I'd unslung my rifle now, holding it ready across my chest with both hands. I didn't want to shoot anything or anyone, but I wanted to be ready if something went wrong. I spotted movement ahead through the trees, dark shapes that seemed massive, even at a distance, moving with obvious purpose and coordination. My mouth went dry. I crept closer, using every bit of stalking skill I'd developed over years of hunting, moving slow and deliberate, testing each footstep before committing my weight. Finally, I reached a spot where the ground dropped away into a natural ravine, and I found myself looking down from an elevated position into a scene that made me question my sanity. 4 Bigfoots were working in the ravine below me, maybe 60 yards away. They were moving logs toward a cave entrance at the far end of the ravine, working together like a construction crew that had done this same task 1,000 times before. One of them was clearly the leader, standing at least 9 feet tall, maybe taller. Its fur was darker than the others, almost black in the shadows of the ravine. This big one moved between the others, directing their work with gestures and those low grunting calls I'd heard. It would point at a log, grunt twice, and 2 of the smaller ones would lift the log together and carry it toward the cave. It would wave its arm in a sweeping motion, and they'd adjust their grip or change their angle of approach. I watched them work, barely remembering to breathe. They communicated with each other using low grunts and hand signals, their movements coordinated and purposeful. 2 would lift a log in unison, responding to a signal from the big one, and carry it toward the cave entrance. They'd grunt out a rhythm as they walked, timing their steps to the sound. When they reached the cave, they'd carefully maneuver the log through the entrance, taking their time to get the angle right, working together to navigate the tight space. The big one would gesture and grunt instructions, and the workers would adjust their technique, shifting their grip or changing their approach. When a log got stuck on a rock, the leader would move in and help leverage it free, adding its strength to the effort. This wasn't mindless labor. They were solving problems together, adapting their approach based on the challenges each log presented. They moved with purpose and organization that was almost human in its sophistication. This wasn't random activity or instinctive behavior. They were building something specific, following a plan that must have been in the leader's head, and they'd clearly been at it for a while based on the pile of logs I could see near the cave entrance. One of the smaller ones, though it still had to be 7 feet tall and probably weighed 500 pounds, picked up a log by itself and carried it into the cave. It disappeared into the darkness, and I heard sounds echoing from inside, grunts of effort and the thud of wood on stone. A minute later, it emerged and immediately went to get another log. The others followed the same pattern, a steady rotation of carrying logs into the cave and coming back out for more. I needed a better view. I needed to see what was inside that cave, what they were building with all this lumber. I started moving along the ridge above the ravine, trying to find an angle where I could see through the cave entrance without exposing myself to the Bigfoots below. I moved as slowly as I could, testing each step, trying to be absolutely silent. That's when I made the mistake that changed everything. I was watching the Bigfoots instead of watching where I was stepping, and my boot came down on a dry branch hidden under the leaves. The crack echoed through the ravine like a gunshot, impossibly loud in the quiet forest. Every Bigfoot froze instantly, all motion stopping like someone had hit a pause button. For one long second, nobody moved. Then, as one, they all turned their heads toward my position on the ridge. The big one, the leader, let out a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It started deep in his chest, a rumbling that I could feel through the ground under my feet, and built into a call that wasn't quite a roar and wasn't quite a howl. It was something else entirely, something I'd never heard from any animal I'd ever encountered. The sound made every hair on my body stand up, made my legs want to turn and run without consulting my brain first. So I ran. I crashed through the undergrowth like a drunk stumbling through a corn maze, not caring about noise anymore, not trying to be stealthy or smart, just trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and those creatures. Behind me, I could hear them coming, crashing through the brush with sounds like trees falling, moving fast. Way faster than anything that size should be able to move through thick forest. The terrain was working against me. Every vine seemed like it was deliberately trying to trip me, wrapping around my ankles. Every branch slapped at my face like it was aiming for my eyes. Every root reached up to catch my boot. The forest that had seemed beautiful and peaceful an hour ago had transformed into an obstacle course, designed specifically to slow me down. I glanced back over my shoulder just for a second and saw one of them maybe 50 yards behind me and closing fast. It moved through the forest like the undergrowth, and fallen logs were nothing, like they were minor inconveniences to be stepped over or pushed aside. Its long arms swung with each stride, helping it maintain balance as it bounded over obstacles that would have stopped me cold. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming in protest, but fear kept me moving. I was running faster than I'd ever run in my life, pure terror driving every step. Then my foot caught on an exposed root and I went down hard, slamming into the ground with enough force to knock the wind completely out of me. I tried to get up immediately, rolling onto my side, gasping for air. But before I could get my feet under me, a massive hand grabbed my backpack and yanked me backwards. I was lifted off the ground like a child's toy, my feet kicking at empty air. I struggled against the grip, twisting and thrashing, and my rifle fell from my hands. I watched it tumble to the ground and disappear into the carpet of leaves. Another Bigfoot appeared in front of me, blocking any path forward even if I could have gotten free. I was surrounded, trapped between multiple creatures, each one more than capable of tearing me apart. The big one, the leader from the ravine, pushed through the others and stood directly over me. It stared down with dark, intelligent eyes that held my gaze. This wasn't the blank, empty stare of an animal. There was thought happening behind those eyes, consideration, decision-making. The creature was studying me, trying to figure out what I was and what to do about me. I tried to speak, tried to plead for my life or explain that I meant no harm, but my throat was locked up tight with fear and shock. No words would come out, just a strangled gasp that didn't sound human. The big one looked at me for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it gave a slight nod, a very human gesture that made my skin crawl. It had made its decision about me. I felt more than saw one of the smaller Bigfoots moving behind me. I tried to turn, tried to see what was coming, but I wasn't fast enough. The blow hit the back of my head hard enough that I saw stars. The world tilted sideways, colors bleeding together, sounds becoming distant and muffled. Then everything went black and I fell into unconsciousness, not knowing if I'd ever wake up again. I woke up to absolute darkness and a pounding headache that felt like someone was driving railroad spikes through my skull. For the first few moments, I couldn't see anything at all, couldn't even tell if my eyes were open or closed. There was only the sound of dripping water echoing somewhere nearby, each drop hitting stone with a hollow plinking sound. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, shapes began to emerge from the black. Rough stone walls surrounding me on 3 sides. A low ceiling of rock above, close enough that I could probably touch it if I stood up. A single opening at one end leading to what looked like a tunnel disappearing into even deeper darkness. I was in a cave chamber, maybe 10 feet across and twice as long. The floor was rough stone, worn smooth in places by centuries of water flow. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in my body ached, especially my back and shoulders from being dragged or carried. My head throbbed with each heartbeat. I realized my hands weren't bound though. I was free to move, just incredibly sore. I checked my pockets with shaking hands. My phone was gone. My knife was gone. My GPS unit wasn't in its case on my belt. My wallet was still in my back pocket, useless in a cave. Everything that could have helped me navigate or defend myself or call for help had been removed. I heard movement in the tunnel, heavy footfalls getting closer. One of the Bigfoots entered the chamber, its massive form filling the opening and blocking what little light filtered in from somewhere deeper in the cave system. The creature was carrying something under one arm. Without acknowledging me in any way, without even glancing in my direction, it dropped the bundle on the cave floor near where I lay and turned to leave. The whole interaction took maybe 5 seconds. Then it was gone, disappearing back into the tunnel, leaving me alone in the darkness again. I crawled over to the bundle on hands and knees, my body protesting every movement. It was my backpack. I opened it with hands that shook so badly I could barely work the zipper. My water bottles were still inside, and I drank from one immediately, my throat raw and desperate for liquid. The energy bars and jerky were still there too, carefully arranged in the bottom of the pack. But my phone was missing, my knife was gone, my GPS unit wasn't there. Even my matches had been removed. Everything that could be used as a weapon or communication device, everything that could help me escape or fight back or call for help had been taken. They'd left me with just enough supplies to survive, but nothing that would help me get free. I ate one of the energy bars even though I wasn't hungry, knowing I needed to keep my strength up. Then I tried to explore my prison. I made my way to the tunnel opening, moving carefully in the darkness. When I reached it, I found one of the Bigfoots sitting in the tunnel, blocking the passage completely. It was positioned maybe 20 feet down the tunnel, just visible in the dim light. It didn't move when I appeared, didn't acknowledge me at all. It just sat there like a living wall, watching. I backed away and retreated to my chamber. There was no getting past that guard, and I didn't want to anger it by trying something stupid. Time became meaningless in that darkness. I couldn't tell if hours were passing or days. The only way I could mark time was by when the Bigfoots brought me food. They came twice each cycle, though I had no way of knowing if that was twice a day or some other interval. They'd drop off berries, roots, sometimes fish that looked like it had been caught recently and cleaned but not cooked. The food was edible, barely, and I forced myself to eat it even when my stomach turned at the thought. I needed strength. I needed to survive. They never spoke to me, never made eye contact, never acknowledged my existence beyond dropping off food and leaving. I tried talking to them at first, begging them to let me go, asking what they wanted with me, pleading for some explanation. They showed absolutely no reaction to my words. It was like I was talking to stone walls. I slept on the cave floor, curled up against the cold stone, shivering through what I assumed were nights. My dreams were nightmares. I dreamed of being torn apart, of being eaten alive, of never seeing my wife or family again. I'd wake up gasping, convinced for a moment that the nightmares were real, then realized the reality wasn't much better. Once I woke up to find one of them just standing in the chamber, maybe 6 feet away, staring down at me in the darkness. I don't know how long it had been there, how long it had been watching me sleep. When I jerked awake with a gasp of terror, it turned and left without a sound. A routine developed, if you could call it that. Food appeared twice per cycle. Water dripped from a crack in the ceiling into a small depression in the stone floor, creating a pool maybe 6 inches deep and a foot across. I drank from that pool, trying not to think too hard about what else might be in the water. I explored every inch of my chamber during what I assumed were waking hours, running my hands over the walls in the darkness, searching for any weakness or exit I might have missed. I found old scratch marks in the stone, worn smooth by time. Someone or something had been held here before me. I found carved symbols too, shapes I didn't recognize, cut into the rock with something sharp. I traced them with my fingers, wondering what they meant, if they were messages or warnings or just the random marks of someone going slowly insane in the darkness. In one corner of the chamber, hidden behind a small rock outcropping, I found bones. Small ones, nothing that looked human, probably from animals the Bigfoots had eaten or killed. But I didn't examine them too closely. I didn't want to know. I tried to count the cycles, tried to mark each one somehow so I wouldn't completely lose track of time. I used a small, sharp stone to scratch marks on the wall of my chamber, one mark for each time I assumed a full day had passed based on the food delivery schedule. After what I counted as 3 days, I had 6 marks on the wall. On what I thought was the 4th day, the routine changed. Multiple Bigfoots entered my chamber together, their massive forms filling the small space. The big one, the leader, was there. It moved to the center of the chamber and gestured at me with one huge hand, a clear command to stand up. I complied, my legs shaky from days of sitting and minimal movement. I had to lean against the wall for a moment to get my balance. The leader watched me with those intelligent eyes, waiting patiently for me to get steady on my feet. Then they surrounded me, 4 or 5 of them forming a loose circle. One made a grunting sound and gestured toward the tunnel. The message was clear. We were going somewhere. They guided me into the tunnel, keeping me in the center of their group. This was it, I thought. They were taking me somewhere to kill me. They'd kept me alive for a few days, studied me maybe, and now they were done. They were taking me to whatever place they used for executions or sacrifices or whatever Bigfoots did with the humans they captured. The tunnel system was far more extensive than I'd imagined. We walked through winding passages that branched off in multiple directions, a maze of natural limestone corridors carved by ancient water flow. Without the Bigfoots guiding me, I'd have been hopelessly lost in minutes. We passed other chambers as we walked. Some were filled with logs, neatly stacked like a lumberyard deep underground. Others contained strange objects I couldn't identify in the dim light that filtered in from cracks in the ceiling. Bundles of plant matter, arrangements of stones, things that looked almost like tools. One chamber we passed made my blood run cold. It was full of bones, arranged in elaborate circular patterns on the floor. Skulls of various sizes lined the walls. Some were clearly animal skulls, deer and bear and other creatures I recognized. Others were larger, strange, not quite right. I tried to slow down to look closer, morbid fascination overwhelming my fear for a moment. But one of the Bigfoots pushed me along, grunting impatiently. We walked for what felt like an hour, but might have been less. It was impossible to judge time or distance in the tunnels. Eventually, I saw light ahead, real sunlight filtering in from somewhere. We were approaching an exit. We emerged from the cave system into bright sunlight that blinded me after days in darkness. I couldn't see anything for the first few moments, just had to close my eyes against the painful glare and let the Bigfoots guide me forward by pushing me from behind. My eyes watered and burned as they tried to adjust. When I could finally see again, I found myself in a forest I didn't recognize. The trees were different here, more evergreens mixed with the hardwoods. The undergrowth was thicker. The terrain had a different feel. I'd been completely turned around in those caves, brought out in some completely different part of the forest miles from where I'd entered. The Bigfoots kept me moving forward through the trees. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, the leader in front setting the pace, the others surrounding me on all sides. I thought about running, but I knew I wouldn't make it 10 steps before they caught me. And where would I run to anyway? I was lost, miles from anywhere I recognized. Then we came to a massive clearing, and I stopped walking without even meaning to. My legs just refused to move forward. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that made absolutely no sense, something that shouldn't exist and couldn't exist but was right there in front of me anyway. It looked like a teepee, but scaled up to impossible size and built from materials no teepee had ever used. The main structure was made from entire tree trunks, not poles or branches. Massive logs that must have weighed tons each, arranged in a complex pattern that leaned inward to meet at a peak high above. The structure towered at least 40 feet high, maybe more. The base was circular, probably 60 feet across. The main logs that formed the skeleton of the structure were each at least 2 feet in diameter and looked like they'd been stripped of bark and branches. Between these massive primary logs, smaller logs and thick branches had been woven together, creating walls that enclosed the interior space. The craftsmanship was incredible, each piece fitted together with obvious care and skill. The entire structure was covered in carvings, symbols and patterns I'd never seen before, cut deep into the wood. Some of the symbols looked almost recognizable, like twisted versions of letters or numbers. Others were completely alien, abstract shapes and curves that might have meant something or might have been purely decorative. At the main entrance, which faced east, hung collections of bones and feathers and dried plants. Deer antlers were arranged in symmetrical patterns. Bird skulls were strung on plant fiber cords. Bundles of what might have been sage or some other herb were tied to the logs with twisted bark strips. Around the base of the structure, stones had been arranged in circles and lines that radiated outward from the entrance. More symbols were carved into these stones, and each stone appeared to have been carefully selected and placed. Between the stone arrangements were dozens of small totems, structures made from stacked rocks and twisted branches that stood like sentinels guarding the larger structure. The whole thing radiated something that made my skin crawl, something ancient and powerful and sacred. This wasn't just a building or a shelter. This was a temple, a holy place, something built with reverence and maintained with devotion. The Bigfoot stopped at the edge of the clearing, about 50 yards from the structure. They began making low humming sounds together, a rhythmic chant that started deep in their chests and built in volume. The sound was almost hypnotic, resonating in a frequency I could feel as much as hear. The leader stepped forward, breaking from the group. The others fell into a single file line behind it, moving with ceremonial precision. I felt a push from behind, strong but not violent, guiding me to the back of the line. We walked slowly toward the structure, all of them with their heads slightly bowed, moving in rhythm with their humming chant. I copied their posture, bowing my head, not knowing what else to do. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. As we got closer to the structure, I could see more details. Antlers and skulls weren't just decorating the entrance, they were arranged in specific patterns around the entire exterior, placed at regular intervals. Strange symbols had been painted on the main logs, using what looked like red clay or maybe dried blood. The symbols formed bands that spiraled around the structure, climbing from ground level up toward the peak. Inside the entrance, just visible through the opening, I could see more arranged objects, stones placed in careful geometric patterns, bones laid out in lines and circles, pieces of twisted wood that might have been natural formations or might have been shaped by hands. Everything had been placed with obvious intention and care. The Bigfoots formed a semicircle in front of the structure's entrance, and I was positioned in the middle of the arc. Then, together, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they all bowed deeply. Their upper bodies folded forward until their heads were nearly touching the ground, a gesture of complete submission and reverence. They stayed in that position, perfectly still, perfectly silent. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees around the clearing. I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. Then one of them made a low grunting sound without moving or lifting its head. The meaning was clear even without words. I was supposed to bow too. I dropped to the ground and pressed my forehead down, copying their posture as exactly as I could. It felt absurd bowing to a structure made of wood and stone, but I was terrified of offending them, of disrupting their ceremony and paying for it with my life. We stayed bowed for what felt like forever. Minutes passed, maybe 5 or 10, I couldn't tell. My back started to ache from holding the position, my neck cramped. But I didn't move, didn't dare adjust my posture even slightly. Finally, I heard them starting to rise, heard the sound of their movements. One of them made a different grunt, and I understood I was supposed to stay down. I kept my forehead pressed to the ground, listening to them move around me. I could hear them doing things around the structure, moving objects, placing things. I risked glancing up just slightly, just enough to see what was happening while trying to keep my head mostly down. They were placing offerings at the base of the structure. One Bigfoot brought a freshly killed rabbit, still warm and limp, and laid it carefully on the stones near the entrance. Another was arranging pine branches in a specific pattern, placing each branch with obvious care and intention. A third was adding more feathers to one of the hanging collections, tying them on with plant fiber. The leader, the big one, had picked up a stick and was drawing new symbols in the dirt near the stone arrangements. It drew slowly and deliberately, creating shapes that were probably meaningful in ways I couldn't understand. This was definitely a ceremony, a ritual they'd probably performed countless times before. They were making offerings to whatever this structure represented, showing devotion to something they believed in deeply enough to build this massive temple in the middle of the forest. I realized with growing horror that I was part of the ceremony somehow. They'd brought me here for a reason. I was involved in whatever was about to happen. Was I the sacrifice? Were they going to kill me here as an offering to whatever they worshipped? My fear spiked even higher if that was possible. I tried to stay perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping that if I didn't draw attention to myself, maybe they'd forget I was here or decide I wasn't worth killing. The ceremony continued around me for what felt like hours. The Bigfoots entered and exited the structure through the main entrance, carrying things in and bringing other things out. Each time the entrance opened wider, I could see inside a little better. The interior was even more elaborate than the exterior. More symbols covered every visible surface, carved into the logs or painted on. More arranged objects filled the space, stones and bones and wood pieces all placed in patterns that clearly had meaning. In the center, I could see what looked like a fire pit, though no fire was burning at the moment. Hanging from the ceiling were bundles of dried plants and bones threaded on cords, swaying slightly in the air currents. Everything about this place spoke of something ancient, something that had been practiced and refined over a very long time. This wasn't new. This tradition, whatever it was, had roots that went back generations, maybe centuries. The ceremony seemed to be reaching some kind of climax. The Bigfoots were gathering closer, their vocalizations getting louder and more intense, taking on a rhythmic quality that was almost like singing. They were forming a tighter circle, and I was in the middle of it. This was it. This was the moment when they were going to kill me. Then, beneath the sound of their chanting, I heard something else. Running water. Somewhere beyond this clearing, beyond the edge of the forest, there was the sound of substantial water flow. A stream, or maybe a waterfall. I focused on that sound, trying to pinpoint its exact location while keeping my head down and my body in the bowed position. The water sound was coming from somewhere to my right, maybe 100 yards away through the trees. The sound gave me an idea, a desperate, probably suicidal idea, but it was the only chance I had. If I could make it to that water, if I could get there before they caught me, maybe I could escape. Water would mask my scent. Water would give me a direction to follow downstream. Water might be my only hope. I studied the Bigfoot's positions as carefully as I could without moving my head too obviously. The closest one was to my left, about 10 feet away. The others were more focused on the structure, their backs partially turned to me as they faced their temple. Their attention was divided between me and their ceremony. The sound of running water gave me a specific direction to run toward. If I could just get past that first Bigfoot, if I could get into the trees before they reacted, I might have a chance. A tiny chance, but better than waiting here to be sacrificed. My muscles tensed, preparing to move. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run, to act, to do something before it was too late. The Bigfoots began a new phase of their ceremony, all of them vocalizing together in a rhythmic chant that filled the clearing. Their attention was focused inward on the ritual, on their worship. This was my moment. This was the only chance I was going to get. I exploded into motion, going from perfectly still to full sprint in an instant. I heard the immediate roar of surprise behind me, heard the sound of pursuit starting almost before I'd taken 2 steps. But I didn't look back, didn't slow down. I just ran toward the sound of water with everything I had. I crashed through the underbrush at the edge of the clearing, branches whipping my face and arms, thorns tearing at my clothes and skin. Behind me, the sounds of pursuit were terrifyingly close. heavy footfalls that shook the ground, grunts of effort, the crack of branches being broken instead of pushed aside. The sound of water was getting louder. I was heading in the right direction. That was something. My legs were burning with effort, my lungs screaming for air. I'd been trapped in a cave for days with minimal movement and terrible food. I wasn't in condition for this kind of sprint. But adrenaline and pure terror kept me moving, kept my legs pumping even when every muscle wanted to quit. I could hear one of them right behind me now, close enough that I could hear its breathing, heavy and rhythmic. Close enough that I could hear individual footfalls hitting the ground. It was gaining on me, and there was nothing I could do to move any faster. I burst through a final line of trees and suddenly found myself at the edge of a cliff. The ground just dropped away, falling down to a churning pool of water far below. A waterfall plunged down the rock face, maybe 50 feet of free fall before hitting the water. I could hear the Bigfoot right behind me, so close I could practically feel its breath on my neck. There was no time to think about how dangerous this was, no time to consider whether the water was deep enough or if there were rocks hidden below the surface. I jumped. For one weightless moment, I was suspended in empty air, falling but not yet fallen. Terror and hope mixed together in my chest, two emotions pulling in opposite directions. Then I hit the water. The impact was brutal, like being hit by a truck. All the air was driven from my lungs in an instant. The cold was so intense it felt like being electrocuted, every nerve in my body screaming in shock. I went deep under the surface, tumbling in the current, completely disoriented and unable to tell which direction was up. I kicked desperately, clawing at the water, my lungs burning for air. I had no idea if I was swimming toward the surface or deeper into the pool. The water was churning from the waterfall impact, pulling me in multiple directions at once. Finally, after what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, I broke the surface. I gasped and coughed, sucking in air mixed with water spray, my vision blurred and my ears ringing. The current was strong, pulling me away from the waterfall and downstream. I looked up through the spray and saw the Bigfoot standing at the edge of the cliff, its massive form silhouetted against the sky. It stared down at me as the current carried me away. It didn't jump. It didn't pursue. It just stood there and watched as the stream swept me downstream and around a bend. I focused on staying afloat, on keeping my head above water. The stream was moving fast, bouncing me off rocks, pulling me through rapids. The water was freezing cold, mountain runoff that felt like it had come straight from a glacier. I could feel it sapping my strength with every second, my muscles getting sluggish and unresponsive. I tried to swim toward the shore, but the current was too strong. All I could do was try to steer, try to avoid the worst of the rocks, and hope the stream would slow down before hypothermia set in. After what might have been 5 minutes or 20, I managed to grab onto a large rock jutting out of the water. I held on with what little strength I had left and used the rock to pull myself into shallower water near the shore. Then I dragged myself up onto the bank, coughing up water, shaking violently from the cold. I lay there on the muddy bank for several minutes, unable to do anything except breathe and shake. I couldn't believe I was still alive. The fall alone should have killed me. The cold water should have finished the job. But somehow, against all odds, I'd survived. I knew I couldn't stay there though. I needed to keep moving, needed to warm up, needed to put more distance between myself and those creatures. With effort that felt superhuman, I got to my feet. I was soaked to the bone, freezing, exhausted, and completely lost. But I was alive and free. That was something. I followed the stream downhill, figuring that water always flows down and down, eventually leads to civilization. Every sound made me jump, Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig had me spinning around, expecting to see Bigfoots emerging from the trees, but nothing came. Either they couldn't follow me across the water or they decided to let me go. I walked for hours through the forest, my wet clothes chafing and my boots squishing with every step. The afternoon sun helped a little, warming my shoulders and slowly drying my outer layers. But I was still shivering uncontrollably. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees, when I finally recognized something. An old oak tree that had been struck by lightning years ago, its top half blown off and the trunk scarred black. I knew that tree. It marked the edge of my usual hunting grounds. From there, I knew exactly where I was and how to get to my truck. I was about 3 miles away, assuming I cut straight through instead of following the trails. I practically ran the final distance, exhaustion forgotten in my desperation to get out of these woods. When I finally saw my truck sitting in the same pull-off where I'd left it what felt like a lifetime ago, I almost broke down crying with relief. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When the engine finally started, I locked all the doors and just sat there for a moment, safe inside my truck, trying to process everything that had happened. I drove down that mountain road faster than was safe, not caring about the ruts and rocks and washouts that could have damaged my truck. I didn't slow down until I hit paved roads, didn't really relax until I could see the lights of town ahead. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that enormous structure rising up in the clearing. Saw those carved symbols and arranged offerings, saw the Bigfoots performing their ancient ceremony. I could hear their chanting echoing in my memory, feel the terror of being surrounded in that clearing with nowhere to run. My wife asked what happened, why I looked so rough, and why I'd come home hours late and soaking wet. I told her I'd slipped into a creek while crossing it and had gotten turned around trying to find my way back to the truck. She was upset that I'd worried her, but she believed me. She had no reason not to. I never went back for my trail cameras. The 2 hidden ones that had captured the first clear footage of the Bigfoots, they're still out there somewhere, buried under leaves and branches, along with my rifle, my knife, my phone, my GPS unit, all of it abandoned in those woods. I thought about going to the authorities, reporting what I'd seen and what had happened to me, but I couldn't imagine how that conversation would go. What would I say? That I'd been kidnapped by Bigfoots and held in a cave and taken to see their temple. They'd think I was insane. They'd think I'd hit my head in that creek fall and hallucinated the whole thing. And even if they believed me, what would happen then? People would flood into those woods looking for the Bigfoots and their structure. Media trucks, amateur cryptozoologists, thrill seekers, all of them tramping through the forest. I didn't know if the Bigfoots would just move away to somewhere even more remote, or if they'd defend their territory violently. Either way, I didn't want to be responsible for what might happen. I still hunt, but I go to different woods now. State game lands about 50 miles from home, far enough that I feel safe, far enough that I'm sure I won't accidentally wander into Bigfoot territory again. I don't use trail cameras anymore, don't see the point really, and I don't go into parts of the forest I don't know, don't explore off the beaten path the way I used to. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up hearing that low humming sound in my mind. The sound of the Bigfoots chanting around their temple, their voices rising and falling in that ancient rhythm. I wonder if they're still there, still gathering at that structure, still performing their ceremonies in the deep woods where almost nobody ever goes. I know they are. And I know that some part of me will never forget what I saw, will never stop wondering what else is out there in the wild places, what other secrets the forest is keeping from us. But I won't go looking for answers again. Once was enough, more than enough. For more interesting stories, check this out.